All right, let's talk about one of the most powerful skills a leader can have, and one that's so often misunderstood. I'm talking about delegation. Now, this isn't just about, handing off tasks. It's really about empowering your team, making a bigger impact, and frankly, getting out of your own way. So let's dive in.
Okay, let me ask you something. Does this sound familiar? You've got this never-ending to-do list, and this little voice in your head keeps saying, you know what, if I want this done right, I just have to do it myself. Yeah, that's a super common trap for managers. And honestly, it's one of the biggest things holding back both you and your team from really growing.
So to get our heads around what delegation really is, let's use a super simple story. Think about this. A mother sends her kid to the store to buy a pack of Maggi noodles. Just a simple everyday errand, right? But believe it or not, inside that one little action is the entire blueprint for how delegation is supposed to work.
Okay, so what's the official definition? Well, at its core, delegation is the transfer of authority downwards. A manager gives someone on their team the power to get something done. In our little Maggie story, the mother is transferring her authority, the power to spend her money, to the child so they can complete that specific task. This is a bedrock idea for pretty much any organization.
All right, so how does this actually work in the real world? It turns out effective delegation really boils down to three core elements. Let's break them down.
Yeah, you really have to think of it like a chain with three links. First, you've got authority. That's the power to do the thing. Next up is responsibility. That's the task itself. And finally, you have accountability, which is all about being answerable for how it turns out. And here's the key. For delegation to actually work, you need all three. You can't skip a step.
So let's start with number one, authority. This is literally the power the manager gives to an employee to get the job done. It's the right to make decisions, to use resources, and it always flows downwards, from the manager to the team member. Back to our story, this is the mom giving the kid the money and saying, yep, you have my permission to go to the store.
Next up, we have responsibility. This one's pretty straightforward. It's the employee's job to actually do the thing they were asked to do. It's the what of the whole deal. For the kid in our story, the responsibility is crystal clear. Go buy the Maggie and bring it back home. Simple. They've accepted the job.
And that brings us to the third piece, accountability. And this one is so important. This is all about being answerable for the end result. So the child has to come back with the noodles and, the right change. But here's the really interesting part. Accountability flows upward. The employee is accountable back up to the manager who gave them the task in the first place.
Okay, so we've got the three building blocks. Now, let's talk about the rules of the road. There are basically four principles that make the difference between successful delegation and, well, chaos. So here's the quick rundown. First, you have to be super clear about what you expect. Second, you got to balance the power you give with the task you assign. Third, and this is a big one, the ultimate responsibility always stays with the manager. And fourth, everyone needs to know their boundaries and work within them.
All right, let's zoom in on that idea of parity, because this is where a lot of delegation efforts just fall apart. It's all about balance. Think of it like a scale. On one side, you have authority, the power. On the other, responsibility, the task. If you pile on a huge task but give them zero power to make decisions, you're basically setting them up to fail. And on the flip side, if you give someone a ton of authority with no clear responsibility, that power can get misused. They have to be in sync.
And this right here, this is the absolute bottom line for any manager. Listen closely. You can delegate authority, but you can never delegate your own responsibility. The buck stops with you, period. If your team member messes up, you are still the one who has to answer for it to your boss. You can't pass that up the chain.
So if this all sounds so logical and clear, why is it so darn hard to do in real life? That's a great question. Let's dig into some of the common things that get in the way.
I mean, that really is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Everyone knows it's powerful, but actually getting it right is another story. And the reasons why we struggle with it, well, they're usually tied to some very human and sometimes organizational roadblocks.
We can pretty much sort these roadblocks into three big buckets. The problems can come from the manager, they can come from the employee, or they can come from the organization as a whole.
Let's start with the manager's side. A lot of this is psychological stuff, right? You've got that classic, I can just do it better myself thought. But there's also insecurity, maybe a fear of someone on your team outshining you. It all comes down to a desire to keep control. But here's the crazy part. When you delegate well, it actually makes you look better, not worse. It shows you know how to build a team that delivers.
But hey, it's not always on the manager. The person being delegated to can have barriers too. Maybe they're not very self-confident, or they're terrified of making a mistake and getting criticized. Sometimes they just feel like they're already drowning in work. And if there's no real incentive, no what's in it for me, then getting more work just feels like a punishment, not a growth opportunity.
And then sometimes the problem isn't with a person at all. It's baked into the system. You might be in a company where every single decision has to go all the way to the top. In a culture like that, delegation just isn't in the DNA. If the whole structure is built around control from the top, it's almost impossible for one manager to suddenly start delegating effectively.
Okay, so we've talked about all the things that can go wrong, but pushing through those roadblocks, it is absolutely worth it. Let's talk about the payoff, because honestly, it's huge.
So who actually benefits when delegation is done right? The simple answer is everyone. It's a win-win-win. The manager gets to step back from the weeds and focus on the big picture. The employee gets to learn new skills and feels more motivated. And the organization as a whole gets stronger, more flexible, and ready to grow.
Let's just spell it out. When you delegate well, you free yourself up to do your real job. You develop the skills of your team members. You boost their confidence. You're actually creating the next generation of leaders in your company. You're not just checking tasks off a list. You're building the future capacity of your entire team.
So when you think about it, delegation is really the engine that drives growth. It's what gets your team ready for whatever's coming next. It allows the whole company to scale up without hitting a wall because everything depends on one or two people doing everything.
Look, if there's just one thing you remember from all of this, let it be this. You have to shift your whole mindset. Delegation is not about offloading work you hate. It's about developing people you believe in. It's an act of investment, not an act of avoidance. And that really brings us to the most important part. What are you going to do with this? So I'm going to leave you with a challenge. Think about it right now. What's one single task on your to-do list that you could delegate tomorrow? Not just to get it off your plate, but to purposefully help someone on your team grow. What's that one thing? Thanks for tuning in.